Red Makeup. Chapter 1, No Regrets in Red Makeup. In the midst of the bustling empire, there is a mysterious being named Yunfei. She was not born in this era, nor is she part of this world. She comes from a distant shore, and as a fast wearer, her mission is to change the fate of those harem women who are unwilling and regret their old age. These people, in the long harem life, may have been beautiful as flowers, or have a heart full of ideals and ambitions, but after all, in the palace intrigue and deep palace confinement, they lost themselves and regretted their lives. Whenever the pent-up resentment in the hearts of these women in the deep palace reaches a limit, their regrets will become Yunfei's task. For some reason, she can always find the value of her existence in those resentments that she has been unable to let go of for a long time. Cloud, your mission is here again. That day, with a slight call, the figure of the cloud appeared from the hazy mist. The red clothes she wore shone like flames, symbolizing her identity and the subtle connection between her and those resentful women in the deep palace. Yes, the wish has been concretized, and the goal has been determined. Yunfei gently raised the corners of his mouth, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. This time, she targets a woman named Styx Moon, a queen who has passed away. The tragedy of the Dark Moon is one of the most legendary stories in history. She was originally the Queen of Destiny, but because of a sudden coup d'état, she and her beloved husband, a ruthless emperor, were estranged from each other, and finally could not become the real wife in the emperor's heart. After her death, she still couldn't let go of the regret of her unfulfilled wishes. The wish of the Dark Moon is a great counterattack that reverses her fate, allowing her to get everything she should have again in the world after death. Stygian Moon, your fate will be changed by me today. Yunfei whispered coldly, and then, a ray of light ushered her into a whole new world. Chapter 2, The Road to Counterattack. Yunfei came to a magnificent palace, surrounded by glittering decorations, and the atmosphere was oppressive and gorgeous. This is the former residence of the underworld, the Middle Palace in the Imperial Palace. This is her imprisonment and her dream. The original identity of the Dark Moon was not outstanding. She was born in a family that was not prominent, but with her outstanding talent and wisdom, she became the queen of the emperor of the dynasty. However, all these beautiful visions, in the heart of the person loved by the Dark Moon, the emperor, did not go as she wished. The deep pain and regret in Shen Yu's heart became the bond of her soul after death. She is still hovering in this palace, never letting go of the desire for love and power that she once had. She is not reconciled, nor does she want to be a neglected name in history. Stygian Moon, I'm here. Standing in the underworld of the underworld, she stared at the misty soul with a cold gaze. The soul of the underworld appeared in the underworld, and her face was still beautiful, as if the time after death had not damaged her in the slightest. But there was still a deep resentment and unwillingness in her eyes. You're here. Stygian Moon's voice was cold and sad. I never thought that one day, I would be able to hear someone fulfill my wish for me again. I have heard your wishes. Yunfei smiled slightly, and then with a flick of a finger, the soul of the Dark Moon was brought to her. How should I do that? Styx Moon whispered, her eyes full of longing. All you need is the obsession in your heart to regain the courage you had at the beginning. Yunfei responded, with a resolute tone in his tone, this time, I will help you be reborn. Chapter 3, The Pact of Rebirth. The fate of the Dark Moon is destined to be different from that of other harem women. She is not the kind of woman who dies just for the love of her children. She has infinite ambition and talent in her heart, but because of a palace intrigue and a ruthless imperial heart, she wantonly destroys everything about her. After being reborn, how will she choose? Your background will still not change. Yunfei spoke again, but your choices will no longer be under the control of others. A glimmer of light flashed in Stygian Moon's eyes, and then she took a deep breath and nodded resolutely, I am willing to do it all over again. I want to fight for everything that belongs to me again in this court. With the decision of the Stygian Moon, a ray of light enveloped her, and her soul re-entered the real world. This time, she is no longer the fragile woman, but a strong man with great ambitions and ready to fight back against fate. She decided to stop relying on the indifferent emperor, but to break the shackles of fate in her own way. Chapter 4, The Game of Intrigues. The rebirth of the Dark Moon is not a simple revenge, but also to win a place for herself in the palace. She is no longer the woman who was bullied, but a powerful and intelligent schemer. She knows that all these changes must rely on her own strength, not the so-called love that others give her. She began to connect with other harem concubines, helping women who were also unwilling to do so, and creating opportunities for them. Their wish is that the moon of the dead moon will be the guide in their hearts. A power struggle in the court began. The Stygian moon skillfully uses every opportunity to continuously improve her status. In a short period of time, she has stood at the forefront of the harem and has become the queen in the eyes of many concubines. However, it's not that simple. After all, the shadow moon could not escape the shadow of the indifferent emperor. Although her power gradually increased, the emotions in her heart could never be erased. Stygian moon, are you still obsessed with him? Yunfei appeared in front of her again, looking at her coldly. Stygian moon's eyes dimmed, and then she slowly raised her head, and said with a determined gaze, I won't rely on him anymore, but I won't let go of it completely. All of this, no matter what, I will be in my own hands. Yunfei nodded silently. This is the choice of the shadow moon, and it is also the counterattack path of her fate. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 5, The Future of Endings. Stygian moon's wish was granted, and her fate was reversed. She is no longer the woman who succumbed to fate at the beginning, but has become the most powerful existence in the East Palace. Her love with the Emperor is still complex and delicate, but she is no longer lost in it. And Yunfei has completed his mission. She knew that the fate of these deep palace women, no matter how tragic, would eventually find a path of their own with her help. Every woman who has been unwilling will eventually find their own future in their own choices. Chapter 6, The Hidden Truth. The fate of the shadow moon has been reversed, and she has changed from a queen of the dead country who was imprisoned by the deep palace to a strong man who controls the harem. However, as her power grows, she gradually finds herself mired in mysteries and intrigues. Every corner of the East Palace seems to be hiding secrets, and those hidden truths always surface when she is most inadvertent. One day, while walking in the imperial garden of the harem, she suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned around and saw a young palace maid walking hurriedly with her head down. Queen of Hades, please wait. The maid's voice was low and hurried. Shen Yuya frowned slightly, and there was a vague sense of uneasy dread in her heart. Something? She asked. The palace maid nodded slightly, hurriedly stepped forward, and said in a low voice, There is a secret, about your majesty and her royal highness the empress. I didn't mean to offend, but I heard something I shouldn't have heard. When she heard this, she was shocked, and her brows tightened. She knew that she had always had a question in her mind about how many secrets the indifferent emperor was hiding that she had not known. Say. Stygian Yuya's tone became cold, and her eyes were like knives. The palace maid raised her head and looked at the shadow moon cautiously, a trace of fear flashing in her eyes. Rumor has it that your majesty is not as ruthless as he was said to be. In fact, before her royal highness the queen of Hades died, her majesty ordered a secret investigation into the truth of your death. Stygian Yuya's heart fluttered, her eyes widened slightly, and she looked at the palace maid in surprise. You know the truth about the cause of Hades' death? Yu asked coldly. The palace maid pursed her lips, hesitated for a moment, and then said in a low voice, Your majesty suspects that the queen of Hades did not die of illness back then, but was poisoned by some kind of poison, and this poison is. It was ordered by the minister of the palace at the time. After hearing this, the moon was like a thunderbolt in the sky. She remembered the scene of her death, and although she was angry, she could still feel the cold and poisonous feeling. However, the real reason, at that time she could not perceive. Was all this just a power struggle between the emperor and the powerful ministers of the time? Are you convinced? The tone of the dark moon became more and more solemn. The palace maid whispered, I've only heard some fragments, and I don't fully know about them. But it is said that the power of the former ministers was fought for power, and all this was covered up. A sense of unease welled in the depths of her heart, and she knew that it might not be as simple as she had imagined. The emperor of the year was cold and ruthless, but it was impossible for him to be so cold-blooded to the woman he once loved. So, what kind of conspiracy is hidden in the truth of the death of the dark moon? Okay, I see. The moon turned around, and the eyes that looked at the palace maid were still cold. You can leave. The maid took a few steps back, bowed her head, and quickly left the garden. The moon stood in place, with mixed feelings in her heart. The truth of all this seems to be quietly emerging. And will she continue to rely on her former so-called power, or should she choose a different path to uncover the truth of this palace conspiracy? Underscore 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 un. Chapter 7, The Struggle in the Palace. Her heart was full of doubts, and she decided to stop relying on other people's so-called intelligence, and instead began to investigate the truth of the year herself. She began to secretly gather clues in the palace, and found several former palace people who had been with her colleagues, and they may have known something that had been hidden. Late one night, Styx Yu arrives at a forbidden place inside the palace, a place she has never entered, which is said to be the Emperor's private study. She was filled with curiosity and apprehension, and this place might hide all the secrets she had never known. She crept into the study, looked around, and suddenly found an ancient book hidden deep in a shelf. Styx gently pulled out the book and flipped open the page, which contained some strange symbols and words that she was not familiar with, but when she reached the last page, her gaze suddenly froze. At the end of the page, it reads: "The death of the shadow moon is not caused by illness, but is actually a conspiracy." This sentence was like a bombshell, and it shook the heart of the dark moon so that it could not be calmed. It turned out that her death was really carefully planned, and all this was not as simple as she thought. The pages of the book then record the names of several powerful ministers of that year, who, in order to compete for power, joined forces and secretly poisoned the shadow moon, and all this was carried out under the emperor's nose. Shen Yuyu's heart was shocked. It turned out that all the tragedies she had experienced were actually a bottomless conspiracy. And the indifferent emperor knew about it for a long time, but chose to turn a blind eye. "It's up to me to end all this." Stygian Yu slowly put down the book, her eyes full of determination. She knew that she could no longer rely on anyone, but had to uncover the truth behind it all herself. Chapter 8: The End of the Conspiracy. Determined to uncover the truth, the Moon of Darkness no longer relies solely on intrigue and power struggles to achieve victory, but to truly take control of her own destiny. She began to have a dialogue with all the people in the palace who knew about it, and used her own wisdom and power to pull down those powerful ministers who had been hostile to her one by one, and gradually moved towards victory. With the fall of power, Stygian Moon gradually took control of the entire harem, and her reputation became louder and louder. Finally, at a grand court ceremony, Styx Yu stood at the pinnacle of power, and this time, she was no longer the woman who passively waited for fate to be arranged, but became the queen who truly controlled her fate. However, when she reached the pinnacle of power, she still did not forget the emperor she once loved. She understands that her success does not come entirely from the mastery of her means, but from a heart that was once strong. Styx Yu looked down at her hands, a bitter smile appearing in her eyes. She is no longer the simple woman she was back then, and all that remains in her eyes is endless memories of the past and a firm future. "I finally got it," she muttered softly. However, will all this really bring her out of the shadows of the past, or will it push her deeper into the darkness? Shen Yu knew that the duel between herself and fate had just begun.